tiny note slipped into his hand. "Don't eat. The meat is poisoned." Changed everything at Velvet Hearth Boston. Chloe, a brave waitress, saved Dominic Ross from a cruel manager who wanted to shame the poor black father with a dirty steak. The restaurant had no idea this dirty mechanic was actually their billionaire CEO, hiding to find fairness in his own food chain. Cruel bias was clear when the staff openly treated Dominic with disrespect. Determined to expose them, he faces big problems: a framed wallet theft, a silent kitchen, and the threat of being kicked out. How will this dramatic showdown end? Right after that rough little paper touched his warm palm, Dominic Ross felt the whole room shift around him. The dining room smelled like dark oak and melted candle wax. Soft violin music drifted from hidden speakers above. Velvet drapes lined every wall, deep red and heavy, muffling every sound except quiet murmurs. Waiters glided past, with silver trays, their shoes barely making a sound on the thick carpet. Dominic sat alone at table 14. His jacket was an old Carhartt, stained with 3 years of engine grease. The chair beneath him creaked softly, out of place among the polished wood and gold trim. Under the table, his boots still carried dust from a warehouse he had visited that same morning. He was not a mechanic. He was the founder of Aegis Dining Group, the company that owned this very restaurant. 6 weeks ago, complaints started landing on his desk. Families with low income said his restaurants turned them away. One report mentioned a family denied service over a bill of only $12.50. Another family was refused a table because their shoes looked worn and cheap. Dominic could not believe his own company would do this. He decided to see the truth himself. So tonight, he wore his oldest jacket. He rubbed dirt on his palms. He became nobody special. At home in South Boston, his 6-year-old son Theo was waiting with a babysitter and a bowl of cereal. Dominic promised Theo he would be home before bedtime stories. He hoped that promise would still be true. He glanced around the glowing dining room. Crystal glasses caught the light. Waiters moved like dancers between the tables. Nobody here knew his name. Nobody here knew his bank account held $917,000, moving daily. He wanted it that way. Tonight, he was just a tired working man treating himself to a nice dinner. Aegis Dining Group ran 41 restaurants across the country, each one built on a simple promise: good food, fair prices, respect for every single guest who walked through the door. Dominic had written that promise himself 11 years ago in a cramped office above a laundromat. Back then, he had nothing but a used oven and a stack of unpaid bills. His own father had worked 2 jobs just to keep food on their table growing up. That memory never left him, even now, sitting inside marble floors and gold-trimmed mirrors. Somewhere along the way, his company had grown bigger than he could watch alone. Managers hire managers. Rules got twisted, and somehow, cruelty crept quietly into the cracks. Tonight, he planned to find every single crack, one restaurant at a time. But something about this place already felt wrong. The smiles from the staff looked painted on, not real. Would a billionaire survive the sting of his own employees' cruelty before he could act? That question sat heavy in his chest as a young waitress approached his table with a heavy silver tray. Her name tag read Chloe. She looked nervous, her hands slightly shaking as she set the plate down. She was 23 years old, working double shifts to cover rent and her sister's growing medical bills. Most nights, she left this restaurant with sore feet and barely enough left to buy groceries. Still, she smiled at every table, even the ones who never once smiled back at her. Something about tonight felt different, though. Her stomach had been twisted into knots since her shift began. She had overheard something in the kitchen 20 minutes earlier, something she wished she had never heard. On the plate sat a tomahawk steak, thick and glistening under the warm light. Dominic's nose caught something faint underneath the garlic butter, a sharp, chemical smell almost like bleach. He had spent years around top chefs. His sense of smell was sharper than most people's eyes. Across the room, near the bar, a man in a slim gray suit watched, with his arms crossed. That was Gavin Prescott, the general manager. His smile curled at one corner, cold and amused. He wore polished leather shoes that cost more than most of his staff earned in a week. A thin gold watch caught the candlelight every time he adjusted his cufflinks, slow and deliberate. Gavin liked being watched. He liked being feared even more, especially by the people serving his tables. To him, Velvet Hearth was not just a restaurant. It was his personal kingdom to rule. Chloe set the plate down carefully. Then she leaned in, blocking the security camera with her body. Quickly, she pressed a folded paper into Dominic's rough palm. Her eyes were wide but steady. "Don't touch it," she whispered, barely louder than breath. Then she turned and walked away fast. Dominic sat still. His heart pounded once hard against his ribs. Why would a stranger risk her job to warn a man who looked like nothing more than trash to this room? Under the table, Dominic unfolded the note with trembling fingers. 2 words jumped out at him. The message said the steak was poisoned. It said they wanted to shame him. Minutes earlier, Chloe had walked past the kitchen and heard Gavin's low, mocking voice inside. "Give the poor guy yesterday's cut," Gavin had said, laughing under his breath. He won't know the difference. Adrian had argued weakly, but Gavin reminded him, who signed his paycheck every 2 weeks. Chloe had stood frozen behind the swinging door, her heart pounding against her apron. She could have stayed quiet. Quiet was safer. Quiet kept her job and Ruby's insurance intact. But something about the way Gavin laughed made her stomach turn with disgust. For one long second, Dominic wanted to stand up and shut this whole restaurant down right there. His hands curled into fists. The old CEO instinct screamed at him to call his lawyers immediately. But he stopped himself. If he moved too fast, Gavin would run. Chloe would lose everything. He needed proof, not panic. He needed patience, even though his blood felt like fire. Slowly, he opened his fingers. He lifted a glass of water instead and took a long, quiet sip. His jaw stayed tight, but his face showed nothing. Years of boardroom battles had taught him that mask. Would his silence protect Chloe, or would it only give Gavin more time to hurt her? A door swung open near the kitchen. A tall man in a white coat stepped into the dining room. This was Adrian Thorne, the head chef. His eyes looked tired, with dark circles pressed deep underneath. Adrian was checking on food for another table when his gaze landed on Dominic's untouched steak. His face went pale. His hand gripped the edge of a nearby card until his knuckles turned white. Dominic waved him over with a small, casual gesture like any regular customer might do. The kitchen door swung shut behind Adrian, releasing a quick burst of hot, smoky air. Underneath the smoke, Dominic caught a second smell, sharp and sour, coming from Adrian's apron. He asked about the steak's origin, using words only a real chef would know. Dry aging, marbling grade. Adrian froze for a second. Something about this mechanic did not add up at all. Still, fear pushed him to speak. He leaned close and whispered that he had no choice. "They told me to use yesterday's meat," Adrian said softly. "I needed this job. My daughter needs medicine." Dominic's chest tightened. This was not one bad manager. This was fear spreading through an entire kitchen. Could this shaking chef become the missing piece Dominic needed to bring the whole scheme into the light? Dominic pushed the plate away, firm and clear. He asked politely to speak with the manager. Across the room, Gavin Prescott smiled wider. This was exactly the moment he had been waiting for. His leather shoes clicked sharply against the wooden floor as he walked over, slow and confident. He stopped beside the table, looking down at Dominic like he was staring at gum on his shoe. "Is there a problem?" Gavin asked, his voice dripping with fake sweetness. Dominic stood up slowly. He kept his voice calm, but his eyes locked onto Gavin without blinking. He explained the steak smelled wrong. He said something was off about the meat. Gavin's smile did not fade. Instead, it grew colder, sharper like a blade catching light. What ugly words would this man use next to defend a lie that was already falling apart? People like you don't get to complain here, Gavin said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. He said men in dirty jackets should be thankful for scraps, not making a scene over free food. Several guests turned to stare. Whispers spread across the room like smoke curling from a candle. Gavin demanded payment for the full bill, $145, right at that moment. Dominic's pulse thundered in his ears, but his voice stayed low and steady. Near the fireplace, an old air vent rattled softly, the only honest sound left in the room. A woman in pearls whispered to her husband, calling Dominic that man instead of a person. Gavin fed off their stares, standing taller with every second, like their judgment fed his pride. He truly believed he was protecting something sacred, some invisible standard only he understood. To him, cruelty toward a stranger in worn boots felt less like meanness and more like duty. That twisted belief made him dangerous because he never once thought he was the villain. Dominic noticed the security camera blinking red above the bar, steady and silent, always watching. Gavin had installed that very camera himself, proud of catching every small mistake his staff made. He never imagined it would one day catch him instead. From the corner of the room, Chloe stepped forward, her apron twisted tightly in her fists. She said she would pay the bill herself, from her own paycheck, if it meant Dominic could leave in peace. Something in Dominic's chest cracked open at her offer. This stranger was risking everything for a man she barely knew. Would her kindness be enough to shield him, or would Gavin punish her for speaking up at all? Gavin's eyes narrowed at Chloe. He did not like being challenged in front of paying customers. He stepped closer to Dominic, shoulder brushing hard against his arm on purpose. The move looked like an accident to everyone watching, quick and almost careless. In that same second, his hand moved fast, sliding something small into Dominic's jacket pocket. Nobody noticed except Dominic, who felt the brief, cold weight drop against his ribs. The leather felt smooth and cool, foreign against the rough grease-stained lining of his own jacket. His mind raced, piecing together what had just happened, before Gavin even opened his mouth again. Gavin stepped back and shouted, loud and sharp, that his wallet was missing. He took it, Gavin said, pointing straight at Dominic. That man right there is a thief. Two security guards moved fast, blocking the main doors, before anyone could leave the building. The whole restaurant fell into stunned silence. Forks stopped moving. Conversations died mid-sentence. Could a single lie, spoken with enough confidence, truly destroy an innocent man in front of 100 strangers? Within minutes, flashing blue and red lights pulsed against the restaurant's tall windows outside. Two Boston police officers walked in, their radios crackling, with static against the quiet room. Their boots left small wet marks on the polished floor, tracking in the cold night air. Every guest froze mid-motion, wine glasses hovering halfway to open mouths, breath caught in tight throats. Even the kitchen sounds behind the swinging doors seemed to fade into total silence. Gavin greeted them with practiced calm, pointing again at Dominic like he was reading a script. He stole my wallet, Gavin said. A crocodile leather wallet, worth $3,500. An officer asked Dominic to empty his pockets. The whole dining room leaned in to watch. Dominic's fingers moved slowly. He reached into his jacket, already knowing what waited inside. His hand pulled out a wallet, smooth and dark, exactly matching Gavin's description. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone near the bar muttered the word disgusting under their breath. Gavin's smile returned, wide and victorious. Cuff him, he told the officers, almost laughing now. Dominic's face stayed still, but inside, something ancient and furious was clawing to break free. How could the truth possibly survive when the evidence itself had already been twisted against him? The officers stepped closer, one reaching for the metal cuffs hanging on his belt. At that exact moment, Chloe pushed through the crowd, holding her phone high above her head. "Wait," she shouted, her voice cracking, but refusing to stop. "I have proof. Look at this." She pressed play. A video filled her screen, sharp and clear, from the angle behind the bar. The footage showed Gavin's hand sliding into Dominic's pocket during their shoulder bump minutes earlier. The entire restaurant went dead silent. Even the soft violin music seemed to fade into nothing. An officer leaned in to watch the video twice, his expression changing from doubt to shock. Gavin's face drained of color, pale as the tablecloths draped across every table around him. The same guests, who had whispered cruel words minutes earlier, now stared at Chloe in stunned silence. A young server near the kitchen door pressed a hand over her mouth, eyes wide with disbelief. Nobody had expected the quiet girl, carrying trays, to be the one holding the truth. With the truth on, that small screen be enough to save a man who had said almost nothing. Gavin's calm mask shattered completely. His hands began to shake at his sides. "That video means nothing," he snapped, though his voice had lost all of its earlier confidence. He lunged toward Chloe, trying to grab the phone before more people could see it. An officer stepped between them fast, one hand raised firmly against Gavin's chest. Gavin spun toward the security guards instead, shouting for them to drag both Chloe and Dominic away. "Take them to the back room," he ordered. "We'll handle this quietly, our way." He turned to Chloe, his voice dropping into something colder and far more personal. "You'll never work in this state again," he hissed. "I'll make sure of that myself." He threatened to cancel every benefit tied to her job, including Ruby's fragile health coverage. Chloe's hands trembled, but she did not lower her phone or look away from him. One guard hesitated, glancing nervously between his angry boss and the officers now watching everything closely. Dominic stepped in front of Chloe, without thinking, his broad shoulders forming a wall between her and Gavin. "You will not touch her," Dominic said, his voice low, but carrying real weight now. For the first time that night, Gavin looked genuinely uncertain, like a man realizing his ground was crumbling. What kind of man could stop a manager's fury with nothing but 11 quiet words? For 3 long seconds, nobody in the dining room moved at all. The old air vent above the fireplace clicked once, then hummed low and steady into the silence. A waiter near the kitchen stood frozen mid-step, a tray balanced perfectly still in his hands. Even the officers seemed to sense something enormous was about to happen. Dominic reached up and pulled off his worn, faded cap, letting it fall gently to the floor. He stood taller, his shoulders squared, his presence suddenly filling the entire room like sunlight through glass. He touched a small device on his wrist, one nobody had noticed before that moment. Within 2 minutes, 3 black SUVs rolled to a stop outside the restaurant's front doors. A team of sharply dressed lawyers walked in, followed closely by 2 calm security professionals. "My name is Dominic Ross," he said, his voice filling every corner of the stunned dining room. "I own Aegis Dining Group. I own this restaurant and every restaurant like it across this city." Gasps erupted around the room. Diners half rose from their seats, phones already recording every second. Gavin's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His whole body seemed to fold inward. Could this cruel man survive the truth, now standing directly in front of him? From the kitchen doors, Adrian Thorne came running out, his apron still splattered with sauce. He dropped to his knees near Dominic, his voice breaking, as he confessed everything, loud and clear. "He made me use spoiled meat," Adrian said, pointing at Gavin with a shaking finger. "I'm so sorry." The officers exchanged a quick look, then turned their full attention back toward Gavin Prescott. They asked him to place his hands behind his back, their tone now firm and final. Gavin tried to argue, tried to explain, but his words came out broken and useless. The cold metal cuffs clicked shut around his wrists in front of everyone he once mocked. Would this humiliating fall finally be the ending this cruel, arrogant man truly deserved? The restaurant stayed silent as officers led Gavin toward the front doors, past every staring table. His leather shoes, once so loud and proud, now scraped weakly against the polished wooden floor. Charges would include food tampering, false accusation, and financial fraud within the company itself. Court records later showed Gavin had stolen almost $61,000 over 3 years. He had padded supply orders, pocketed tips meant for kitchen staff, and falsified inspection reports twice. Dominic had quietly investigated Gavin's records for 1 full week before tonight ever happened. Hidden charges, inflated invoices, and stolen tips had all been building toward this exact moment. Justice, it seemed, had simply been waiting for the right spark to finally catch fire. Chloe stood frozen near the bar, her phone still trembling slightly in her hand. Dominic walked over and gently placed his hand on her shoulder, offering a small, grateful smile. "You saved my life tonight," he said quietly. "Not many people would risk that for a stranger." Chloe's eyes filled with tears she had been holding back all night long. She admitted she was terrified of losing her job, her only way to help her little sister. Her sister, Ruby, needed special medical care that cost more money than Chloe earned in months. Dominic listened closely, his expression softening with every word she shared about her sister's illness. Ruby was 11 years old, born with a heart condition that needed constant, expensive monitoring. Chloe had taken this job for the health insurance, hoping it would cover her sister's care. Instead, the company had nearly let her sister suffer, while punishing the very people trying to help. Something about her courage reminded him why he started hiding among his own employees in the first place. He had built Aegis to protect workers just like her, not to crush them under fear. Could one honest choice, made in a single frightening moment, completely change 2 struggling lives forever? Word of the arrest spread quickly through the restaurant, then through the entire city within days. News stations picked up the story, calling it a stunning reveal inside one of Boston's finest restaurants. Reporters camped outside Velvet Hearth for 3 straight days, cameras pointed at its heavy front doors. Old customers came forward, sharing stories of being turned away for looking too poor, too tired, too different. One elderly man said he had been refused a table simply for wearing a faded flannel shirt. A young mother recalled being told her stroller made the dining room look unprofessional to other guests. Each story added another crack to the image Velvet Hearth had spent years building. Local news anchors called it the night the mask finally came off for the whole company. Social media clips of the arrest reached millions of views within just 2 days. Strangers online praised Chloe as a hero, calling her the true face of Aegis Dining Group. Some even started leaving flowers and thank you cards at the restaurant's front entrance. Aegis Dining Group released a public statement, promising deep changes across every single location. Dominic personally reviewed hiring practices, training programs, and every policy tied to how guests were treated. He fired 3 other managers found guilty of similar discrimination against low-income and minority customers. He also created a new company rule, printed clearly on every restaurant's front door. The sign read simply, "Every guest deserves respect, no matter what they look like." He set up a private hotline, letting any employee report unfair treatment, without fear of losing their job. Within 1 month, 43 complaints came in from workers across 9 different states. Dominic personally reviewed every single case, refusing to let any of them slip through the cracks. Some cases needed only an apology. Others needed new managers entirely. He made sure every worker who spoke up felt heard, not punished for their honesty. He also started a scholarship fund, honoring workers like Chloe, who chose courage over comfort. The fund covered tuition costs for employees' children, no matter how small their role in the company. Weeks later, Dominic called Chloe into his real office, high above the busy streets of Boston. She walked in nervously, still unsure why the powerful CEO wanted to see her personally. The office had floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the entire harbor and its gray winter water. A framed photo of Theo sat on the desk, next to a small stack of restaurant complaint letters. Dominic stood and shook her hand firmly, thanking her again for what she had done that night. Dominic offered her a new position, Regional Customer Experience Director for the entire Aegis Dining Group. The salary alone would change her life completely, more than doubling what she earned before. That was only the beginning of his offer. He also promised full coverage for Ruby's medical treatment for as long as she needed it. Chloe could barely speak. Tears rolled freely down her cheeks as she nodded again and again. Could kindness, offered without any expectation of reward, truly return to a person tenfold? As for Adrian Thorne, Dominic chose mercy over punishment, remembering the fear in the chef's eyes. He kept Adrian on staff, but required him to complete a full course on food safety ethics. Adrian accepted without hesitation, grateful for a second chance he never expected to receive. He later told Dominic that fear had clouded his judgment for far too long. "I let a bully control my hands," Adrian admitted. "I won't let that happen again." Dominic nodded, understanding that fear could twist even good people into doing terrible things. He believed second chances mattered, as long as the person truly wanted to change. Months passed. The story of Velvet Hearth became known across the city as a turning point. Other restaurant owners began reviewing their own policies, afraid of becoming the next headline. Industry groups invited Dominic to speak about fairness and dignity in the restaurant business. He always said the same simple thing: treat every guest like they matter, because they do. Small changes rippled outward, one restaurant at a time, one policy at a time. One quiet evening, Dominic returned to Velvet Hearth again, this time in a tailored navy suit. Beside him walked his son Theo, holding tightly to his father's hand with quiet excitement. Chloe greeted them at the door, dressed sharply in her new director's blazer, smiling wide. Her little sister Ruby walked beside her, healthier now, her cheeks full of color again. The four of them sat together at a private table near the warm, glowing fireplace. No cameras, no judgment, no cruel manager watching from across the room this time. The kitchen sent out warm bread first, fresh and soft, steam rising gently from the basket. Steaks arrived, cooked perfectly, served by a staff trained to treat every guest with dignity. The smell of garlic butter drifted up again, but this time it carried no hidden warning underneath. Theo laughed loudly at something Ruby said, the sound bouncing warmly across the quiet dining room. Ruby told a silly joke about a dog who wanted to become a chef, and Theo nearly fell from his chair laughing. Outside the window, snow began to fall softly over the busy Boston street below. Dominic watched the two children together, feeling something settle deep and peaceful inside his chest. He thought about that tiny folded note still tucked safely inside his desk drawer at home. Some nights he still took it out and read those 5 shaky words again. The paper was soft now, worn thin from being folded and unfolded so many times. He kept it not as proof of what happened, but as a reminder of what mattered. They reminded him that courage rarely comes from the powerful. It usually comes from the overlooked. One small act of courage had rewritten the fate of an entire company and 2 families. Adrian Thorne now ran a full training program for young chefs across every Aegis kitchen. He taught them that honesty mattered more than any manager's angry, impatient demand. Gavin Prescott's trial was still ongoing, his once polished name now printed in every local paper. Nobody who once feared him bothered to send a single letter of support. Chloe raised her water glass gently, catching Dominic's eye across the flickering candlelight. "To second chances," she said softly, her voice steady now, no longer shaking with fear. Dominic raised his glass to meet hers, a genuine smile spreading slowly across his face. Outside, Boston streets buzzed quietly under the evening lights, unaware of the quiet victory inside. Inside Velvet Hearth, kindness had finally won, one honest choice at a time.